It's time to look in the mirror, America. Do you like what you see?
I keep referring to Obama as the magic Negro.
Do you like what you see now?
Well, suck on this.
It's just a mirror, America.
Shared sacrifice by everybody.
What could it do to you except reflect your image?
I did nothing wrong at the Minneapolis airport.
The Majority Report.
Far more credible to me than PBS and Frontline.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
If I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Thursday, April 19th, 2018. My name is Michael Brooks, and I'm Michael Thursday, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Daniel Bessner, Democracy in Exile, a history of the defense intellectuals, German emigres in the 1930s, 40s, the Rand Corporation, and the connection between intellectuals who provide advice on foreign policy and democratic accountability, even as we leave supposedly the post-expert age in the Trump era. Republicans move forward their war on the hungry. They're attacking the already very meager and modest food stamp program. A federal judge finds Chris Kobach in contempt of court in a voting rights case. What a surprise. And ICE, your daily report in ICE's terrorism. An upstate New York farmer says ICE officers stormed into his farm without a warrant, cuffed him, and threw his phone. And Trump looking to make a quote-unquote great man play in North Korea, even though if that whole thing works out, we should be thanking South Korea's center-left president. And Castro's rule in Cuba nears an end as Miguel Diaz-Canel is named sole candidate for leadership change. He's 57 years old, next in line after Raul. And just how much trouble is Michael Cohen in? Forget about it? Sorry. It's very lame, but at a certain point, these guys just force you to make the lame New York jokes.
It's very offensive to the Italian community.
It's very offensive to the Italian community. It's the last group. It's like when Ben Shapiro, he said, Italians like to live in sewage and bomb stuff. Oh, wait, no, that was the Palestinians. This is an amazing ad. There's really no other way to frame this. And it basically seems to be a new... We make this point all the time, but for people who make a lot of hay out of, sucking it up, manning up, and just, taking care of business, most of the conservative... There's the, Donald Trump is hounded by the deep state conspiracy theory people, and there's also basically just the, you guys are super mean to President Trump. And this ad, where was this ad released?
It was on CNBC on Tuesday night during the NHL playoff game.
During an NHL playoff game. This woman's name is Amanda Head.
That is correct.
Okay. This is some new defense. And what is this? Is it a 501? We don't have a sound sheet yet. So oh, thank you. Where's my sound sheet? Okay, this is okay, yes, it's a new committee. It's from the Committee to Defend the President. And check out what they have to defend him from.
Hi everyone, I'm Amanda Head, conservative talk show host and ardent President Trump supporter. I spent the last election defending Donald Trump daily against attacks by liberal Democrats and the mainstream media. But that was nothing compared to the vicious attacks and biased reporting that is taking place today. Disgruntled Democrats are stopping at nothing to undermine Donald Trump's presidency. They continue their witch hunt in search of any reason to impeach President Trump. They will stop at absolutely nothing until President Trump is removed from office. That is why I am asking every President Trump supporter to pick up the phone now and call the number on your screen. We need to put an end to these attacks and show that we support President Trump all the way through 2020 and that we have his back. Call now.
Call 800-369-6163 and press 1 now to deliver your voice in support of President Trump. Committee to Defend the President is responsible for the content of this message.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, I can't do that again. David Roth, writing in Deadspin, says, the spot itself is weird enough on its face. Head, who identifies herself as a quote-unquote Hollywood conservative, is so uncharismatic that she seems deeply and almost poignantly medicated. And even by the prevailing standards of this kind of umbrage-making grifto political garbage, it's hard to tell what the hook or call to action even is. A closer look reveals that it's all the more stranger and even infinitely cheesier than it seems. Basically, I mean, it just seems like a number collection. You know, you're just getting people's data.
It's a big net we're casting for the Rube numbers.
Yeah, it's just a good, when President Obama was reelected in 2012, video came out of him telling his staff, he especially at that time, now he's totally in post-presidency, and his brand changed a little bit, but people kind of forget this, and there was a period of time where it was like, he was Spock, and very like, I don't get emotional. And he was talking after winning the election and thanking his staff and reflecting on his last campaign, and he started crying. And he was like, a lot of you're going to go on, you're going to accomplish great things in the for-profit sector and the non-profit sector, and you're going to contribute. And I'm just waiting for the equivalent, like Trump with his staff being like, some of you are going to start small websites that defraud people out of their credit card numbers. Others of you may create fake universities. Others of you, maybe you're going to lobby for Central Asian dictatorships. Whatever sector you're working in, some of you might be in prison and you'll write tell-alls. Some of you might even get into the reality TV business. It's just want to thank all of you. All right. That was 30 seconds of appreciation for other human beings. That's enough. Folks, are you tired of seeing ads when you want to read the news? Are you sick of social media filters on your news? Do you feel like you're often missing out on breaking news? Download Smart News for free in the App Store or Google Play Store and get your news in real time from over 300 trusted sources, including CNN, Vice, HuffPost, The Hill, and more. Smart News' algorithm automatically curates the must-read stories that matter now, so you can get your news in just under a minute. Plus, you can read the news wherever you go, even if you're offline. That's a huge help with this app, being able to catch up on stuff on the subway, as an example, when you're rushing into work. No wonder Smart News already has more than 25 million users worldwide. This app's actually helped me a lot because obviously we're in a specific business. We have to read the news all the time. But one part of it for us, we got to do these really, we have to do deep dives on certain things, kind of like, like a certain type of research. But I just found I was wasting so much time going through just like a sort of menu of websites to kind of cover all my bases. And now with Smart News app, it's all there for me at my fingertips. I just pop on and I have the baseline of what I need every single day in order to do the show and help organize ourselves. And then it makes all the rest of the process much faster. I recommended it to my mom, who's also, she's an avid news consumer, but she loves it because she doesn't have to, cruise through a bunch of different websites anymore. And she always gets the fundamentals of the day, fundamentals of it minute by minute if she wants. Smart News, available for free in the Apple Store or Google Play Store. Check it out. Folks, we are going to take a brief musical interlude, and we will be right back with Daniel Bessner. We're talking about democracy in exile.
Congratulations on the mess you made of things. I'm trying to reconstruct the air and all that brings. And oxidation is the compromise you own. But this is beginning to feel like the dog wants a bone. Say, la, la, la.
Welcome back to the Majority Report. Michael Brooks here. Joining us now is Daniel Bessner. He is an assistant professor in American foreign policy at the Henry M. Jackson School of International Studies at the University of Washington. And he's author of Democracy in Exile, Hans Speier, and the Rise of the Defense Intellectual. Daniel, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks very much for having me.
So, This is a story that takes us through, obviously, this guy Hans Speier, who you're going to explain to us in a minute. He's the sort of pre-Henry Kissinger in some respects, of the kind of European exile who sort of really set the model for this influence in American foreign policy. But we could think of the sort of brand names: Henry Kissinger, Zev Brzezinski. There's an interesting history here, and let's just start to work it backwards a little bit. We go to Trump, and certainly the perspective, my perspective, and the perspective of this show is one of a much more structural critique of U.S. foreign policy that transcends, partisanship and has a lot of bad things to say and maybe just analytic things to say about both Republican and Democratic administrations. Now, that said, the Trump administration has earned the brand, and rightfully so in a lot of ways, of basically being messy, melodramatic idiots who despise, expertise. And, in the Bush era, we had all of these, and this is all my editorial, fanatics who pushed for things like invading Iraq and a global, war on terror and implemented torture regimes and all the rest of it. But they did have the sort of appropriate training according to the standards of the establishment. And now we have, this is the Gorka administration. But that being said, if we pull the lens out a little bit wider and look at John Bolton, we can actually trace that all the way back to the rise of the defense intellectual and Hans Speier and the story you're telling. So maybe situate this a little bit, and then we'll dig into the history of Hans Speier and Rand Corporation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's important to stress first that there's been a lot of talk about how Trump is anti-expertise and his administration is anti-expertise, but I think it might be more accurate to say that he's drawn on alternative expert networks as opposed to rejecting expertise. So, for example, Gorka has a PhD, right? Even though it's a PhD from not a particularly august institution, as far as I can tell, not within the United States, but he does have a PhD. And even someone like Bannon is someone who fancies himself an intellectual. And of course, he had H.R. McMaster and who himself has a PhD in history. And Bolton, of course, is himself a defense intellectual. So I think rather than to say Trump has totally rejected expertise, he's drawn on non-establishment, except with regards to Bolton and McMaster. But in some part, his administration represents a blurring of establishment expertise and the sort of alternative establishment expertises like Gorka and Bannon. So there's all of these elements here. So I think what's important to see is that across administrations, from the Obama administration, where you got people like Anne Marie Slaughter and Samantha Power, and the Trump administration, where you have people like Gorka and Bannon and McMaster and Bolton, and of course in the George W. Bush administration, you have people like Wolfowitz, Condoleezza Rice, Doug Feith, and all these other PhDs in the administration. You could see that these academics, these so-called defense intellectuals, have been permeating the U.S. foreign policy establishment at least since Iraq. And what my book shows is for much longer than that, and that this was actually a conscious effort amongst intellectuals to become part of the foreign policy establishment. And what my book really shows is that this impulse to become part of this establishment began in the 1930s and 1940s and was actually a response to this what's pretty interesting, a left-wing response to a skepticism about ordinary people's ability to make wise political decisions that emerged from people both in Germany, people like Hans Speier and Kissinger, but also people in the United States observing the fact that many of Germany's workers and ordinary people actually supported Hitler. So this demonstrated to a generation of intellectuals that they couldn't trust people, and that in order to save democracy, they ironically needed to become part of state institutions in which they were allowed to influence foreign policy without the oversight of Congress or the public. And this becomes this anti-democratic goal that they institutionalize in places like the Rand Corporation, which is a focus of my book, and that allows people like Kissinger and Condoleezza Rice, but also Francis Fukuyama, Rose Gadamuller, Bernard Brody, Albert Wohlstetter, and many others to leave academia, enter these para-state institutions like Rand, and eventually move into the government itself.
So let's start from the beginning. Who is Hans Speier, and how does this just basically take us through who he was, and then, through that, hit those themes you're talking about, from the reaction to Hitler's rise in Germany to these political and intellectual developments in the United States.
Sure. So Speier was basically a guy who was born in 1905 in Berlin. He came of age during the Weimar Republic, which is the famous German liberal democracy that eventually falls to Hitler in 1933. And ironically, as a young man in his 20s and into his mid and late 20s, he was an avowed socialist and actually a left-wing socialist. And what he argued throughout the Weimar period was that intellectuals like himself needed to educate Germany's workers in order to teach them how to navigate the new institutions of Weimar democracy, right? Germany's a monarchy until 1918. Germany loses the war, and it becomes this new liberal democracy called the Weimar Republic. And Germany's people who are first enfranchised in the Weimar Constitution, at least Speier worries, they don't have the skills necessary to really navigate these institutions, large trade unions, a newly empowered Reichstag, et cetera, et cetera. So what he wants to do is he wants to use his intellectual skills in order to teach workers to manipulate the levers of power directly in this new democratic government. But what happens to Speier and indeed many people in his generation on not only the right, but also the left and the true blue socialist and communist left, is that over the course of the late 20s and early 1930s, they become very disenfranchised with Germany's workers because, at least as they see it, workers supported anti-democratic political movements. On the right, they supported the Nazis, and on the left, they supported the communists, because the communists, like the Nazis in Weimar, didn't like democracy. They wanted to establish a dictatorship of the proletariat and the Leninist guys, et cetera, et cetera. So what this convinces Speier, especially after Hitler comes to power in 1933, this convinces Speier that you're not actually able to rely on ordinary people to defend democracy, which is, of course, what at least his understanding of Marxist theory predicted. Marx said that as societies, or at least as people interpreted Marx in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, people like Bernstein said that as societies become more democratic, workers would support socialists, the socialist movement, and this turned out not to be the case. Mm-hmm. And so what this convinced people like Speier was that during a moment of crisis in which democracy faced an existential threat like the Nazis, intellectuals couldn't actually rely on ordinary people, but instead had to join state institutions and create the policies that would save democracy for the future. So the way I put it in my book is that they wanted to save democracy from the people for the people. And this is what they did.
And is there also a parallel lane of, because these people start emigrating to the United States, but I'm also thinking of people like Walter Lippmann, people in American context who are also writing, and you talk about him as well, who are also setting up the parameters and the frameworks, presumably, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're upset about sort of some of the public rejection of Wilson's attempts to sort of formalize international institutions. And there is this reaction to, particularly when it comes to foreign policy, we just can't have ordinary people influencing it. Now, in that context, there's, very little attention paid to the fact that maybe ordinary people were quite upset about the totally, World War I and the catastrophe and incredible body count, which they had to pay the price for, which is obviously another, theme that runs parallel to this. But what I'm saying is, are they able to, they have this trauma, and then they are able to come here and glom on to a tradition in America that's already these sort of like technocratic mediators of democracy. So maybe like, people with interest in public opinion polling and, how to manage the populace. They can have influence, but it needs to be in tight parameters.
Right, and I think that's exactly right. So on both sides of the Atlantic, in the United States and Germany, intellectuals are dealing with the new technologies of modernity. Things like mass communication technologies like the radio, you're able to easily print newspapers. And it's ironic, in this age of Twitter, people today worry about everyone having a voice. This is exactly what the guys like Speier were saying in the 20s, that to print news magazine, it was so cheap that anyone could have a voice, and this actually hurt political discourse. But what happens is, in the United States, this journalist and intellectual, Walter Lippmann, writes this book called Public Opinion, and these two books, Public Opinion and The Phantom Public, in which he argues that the fact that British propaganda was so able to easily manipulate ordinary Americans into supporting the United States entry into World War I demonstrated that people were easily manipulated, and that what you needed to do is you had to reframe traditional democratic theory which argued that every American citizen would be able to know enough about public affairs to guide foreign policy in a modern age, because modernity was simply too complex for the average person to understand. And this was demonstrated by the fact that they were manipulated during World War I. So one, modernity was too complex, and two, people were easily manipulated. So what Littman argued is that you needed intellectuals to join. He called it something along the lines of an organization connected to the state that would be able to make the facts known upon which policy depends to those who have to make the decisions, or something along his lines. So Littman basically advocated creating a think tank in the early 1920s, well before the first modern think tanks were created in the 50s. And so what you have is when the exiles come to the United States in 1933 and beyond, after Hitler comes to power, is that they're able to enter into an American conversation that was already skeptical of democracy. But why the exiles are particularly important is because they serve as literal physical embodiments of what happens when ordinary people are allowed to run rampant in a democracy, right? They're over time, they're at the most elite American institutions. They get recruited into World War II organizations like the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the CIA, or the Office of War Information, because the United States needs experts on Germany. So they become a very powerful symbol to Americans about what happens when you let ordinary people really take the reins of government. So this is what they do, and why they're so important is because they give a physical presence to Littman's claims, right? They're totally navigating these institutions in the United States, and you're hearing German, literally you hear German accents in all of these powerful American institutions. And so it convinces Americans that they really can't allow this trauma the trauma of Weimar to repeat itself in the United States. And I think one of the most powerful examples of the fact that these exiles had such a resonance in the United States is the fact that Kissinger, even though he came here as a pretty young child, never lost his German accent, right? And the famous line is Kissinger never lost his accent because he never actually stopped long enough to listen to anyone. But the real reason is that he recognized that it was a way to get cultural currency in the American foreign policy establishment. Yeah. Totally. Exactly. It's total branding. And he still sounds like he just came out of Germany, even though he's been here for the overwhelming majority of his life. And so this is what the exiles are really able to do.
Right. He should sound like an old guy on the Upper West Side by now, not like he's, like kind of like ushering you into a concert in Vienna or something in 1925.
Exactly.
So, okay, so that's perfect. And that takes us up to, the 40s and even, I guess, if my reading of this, I mean, obviously you could see all of the landmines and the problems that are in place in this, and as well as the ones that I love that are, that are being repeated now. I mean, the fake news conversation. Yes, is fake news and propaganda, corporate and governmental, a major problem? Of course. The solutions that are, the technocratic solutions that are emerging from places like Facebook actually are very jeopardizing of also what could be, very important and legitimate investigative journalism, right? I mean, so these themes are all alive. But getting back to our story, so World War II is happening. People like Speier are moving inside the defense establishment, inside really an emerging defense establishment and the, intellectual culture of America. Then after World War II, this is going to start to get formalized, and later, I have some more sort of broader contextual questions of how these people fit in, and maybe some broader material causes. But in terms of just the story, is this when Rand arises? Like what the creation of the Rand Corporation, and is this the same interest in creating institutions outside of a democratic process and a fascination with connecting any sort of latest trend, and whether it's, cybernetics or game theory, to give a scientific veneer to these processes. And then I'm assuming, of course, this then leads into Vietnam and linear body counts and Ford Motor Company modeling and McNamara and all of that.
Right, and I think that's exactly right. So what's really important to emphasize is that when people like Speier are arguing for this anti-democratic program in the 30s, where you just need to ignore public opinion and enter the state, is they're saying that this only needs to happen during what they call a moment of crisis, right? Democracy is facing this existential threat with the Nazis, and when you defeat the Nazis, basically democratic life could return to normal, or at least this is what people like Speier were arguing or implying in the 1930s. Nevertheless, what happens after the war, of course, is that the Soviet Union gets one far more powerful due to the war. They become a true challenger to the United States on one hand, and on the other hand, in 1949, they get nuclear weapons. And so what this means is that for Speier, the crisis that had defined the 1930s, which was what he considered a moment of crisis, transforms into an era of crisis. So you can no longer just have ad hoc associations like there's a war, and then you're recruited into the government, and then you go back into academia. But with the rise of a nuclear-armed Soviet Union, that is, with the rise of a permanent existential challenge, you now need permanent or institutional solutions to the problem of public opinion that Speier and Lippmann had identified earlier, right? And so what you're looking for are these institutions like RAND that enable intellectuals to make foreign policy totally outside the public's and Congress's purview. So that's where Speier comes at it. But on the other hand, during World War II, you have all these intellectuals like Speier and, more importantly, probably scientists, physicists, et cetera, entering into the wartime government. And a bunch of military officials around 1944 and 1945, particularly in the Army Air Forces, the Air Force wasn't an independent unit yet. It was still, independent branch of the military as part of the Army. What you have is that after, in 1944 and 1945, they're worried that all of these eggheads are essentially going to return to academia, and they want to maintain their services because they're similarly anxious about the rise of the Soviet Union as a threat to the United States. They want to build world leadership. So what you have, so they want to build these institutions, but they also don't think that intellectuals are going to want to stay in the military, right? Because who would want to stay in the military voluntarily? So what they do is this guy, General Henry Hap Arnold, who was parodied on The Simpsons as General Henry Hap Hapablap, if anyone remembers that episode. So, but this guy, General Henry Arnold, basically gives $10 million to a private corporation, the Douglas Aircraft Company, and Arnold and Donald Douglas, the head of Douglas Aircraft, are actually in-laws. So you see this total embeddedness of the U.S. elite at this moment. But what Arnold does is he gives $10 million to Douglas to found a private research organization, which they dubbed the RAND Corporation, which is an acronym for Research and Development, in which ostensibly private employees working, I would even say early on, solely on government contracts, would be able to offer advice to the military and the government without being subject to any congressional or public sanction, right? So from the very beginning, you have the expansion of the U.S. state. You essentially have the outsourcing of foreign policy research for the U.S. state to pseudo-state institutions like RAND, where intellectuals are able to offer advice totally without paying attention at all to public opinion. So what this does is that it essentially institutionalizes the anti-public or anti-democratic program that Speier and Lippmann had advocated for decades in think tanks like RAND. So these think tanks then become permanently mobilized to fight the Cold War. And of course, unlike in the 30s, the Cold War is from its very beginning set to be a decades-long conflict. You have one by 1949, both powers have nuclear weapons. No one wants to fight a nuclear war. Also, no one wants to fight a third world war. And over time, you have the emergence of a relatively stable bipolar system. So what happens is this, what is a moment of crisis in the 30s, right, once the Nazis are defeated, democratic life could return to normal. After the war becomes an era of crisis in which these anti-democratic ideologies are institutionalized, not only in places like RAND, but in places like the CIA, the National Security Council, which is essentially a body meant to manage America's world hegemony, and which is totally outside the Congress's or the public's purview, right? It's only through the National Security Council, for example, that Kissinger gets into power, and recently Bolton gets into power. These are institutions that are not subject to public accountability. So what you see in the late 40s in the foreign policy making sphere of the American establishment is the institutionalization of an anti-democratic ethos. And in fact, Sorry, yes.
No, finish your thoughts. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say you could even see that this what I would call a liberal, because Speier and all these guys fancied themselves liberals. They were very much not on the right wing. Speier only voted for Democratic Party candidates the entirety of his life. What you see is this becomes a part of liberal discourse when you really can't trust people, and you see it still after the Trump election, right? Everyone's quote unquote, what's the matter with Kansas? And that famous New Yorker cartoon that was going around with a guy standing up in a plane saying, "Let me fly the plane." And of course, every liberal reading the New Yorker was laughing at that. Right. But what it really showed is that there's still this embedded distrust of the public that emerges from this moment pre-1945, this traumatic experience with fascism that still resonates in the American imagination, as you can see through the constant use of Hitler analogies.
Absolutely. So let me kind of introduce a couple of other variables into this that are not, they're not contradictory. They're supplemental, and you allude to them. So it seems like a couple of other things. I mean, one thing that's also going on that I think we can, that I'm also interested in for you to touch on moving forward is that I feel like now, in the creation of this system, the role of the private sector was subordinate in some ways to a governmental parastate foreign policy, and obviously those two things were very connected. There was always this shouldn't be a cliche. Eisenhower did warn about a military-industrial complex in the 50s, and it's a very literally a real thing. That's actually one of the sort of more concrete things in American political discourse and political life. You can see it in budgets and in foreign policy. But moving forward, I'm interested in how, as the role of the private sector got more and more powerful, so that we can even tell this story of Iraq. I mean, it's two catastrophes, and it's this invasion, which was totally wrong, but then it's also a story of privatization and contracts, and I'm very interested. And you could see these defense intellectuals, at least as it became, more fully conservative. But I would say you could still include democratic, foreign policy thinkers in that as well. That the parallel ran with broader sort of marketization and neoliberalization, and you saw it applied to foreign policy, and that applies to everything from privatizing Iraq's electrical grid to Blackwater. And then the other thing, and you could just take these. I just want to put these ladies out for you because I like how you put them both together. It also seems to me that the other thing that's happening in the 40s and 50s and 60s is that the United States has to manage a paradox, and a lot of scholars have noted this, but they have to manage that. Okay, first of all, Britain is winding down, and the United States is going to take over that sort of U.S. empire role, but it's going to be different. It's not going to be a traditionally colonial one in the way that Britain is, right? It's going to be colonial through bases and through commercial arrangements and through keeping the lanes of commerce clean and clear, but it's not going to be through the official the sun never sets on the British Empire, right? I mean, you could argue that it doesn't set on the American one either, but it's different. It's an evolution of that model. And then there's the paradox that as that model's evolving, it's like, okay, well, on one hand, there's even this rhetoric of, we're a democracy and we're supporting decolonization, but then at the same time, we need to make sure that there is no policies that are contradictory to our, commercial interests in our zones of influence. And by the way, we're going to develop this parastate apparatus that will, instigate coups, overthrow democracies, organize death squads everywhere from Indonesia to Guatemala as part of the basic power play. So is it also, and I guess we can move to the privatization later. I should have brought that up later. But is this also another thing that's going on, that you need this sort of grid of thinkers that can not only keep foreign policy out of the public, but also start to justify the contradictions? Because in some senses, these other colonial enterprises are much more, they might be hypocritical, but they're coherent, right? Like, even, the Soviet Union, we're going to put the Red Army in and stamp down the rebellion, and that's what the party says, and that is what it is, right? And then in the United States, it's like, well, on one hand, we're going to have the United Nations and blah, 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 and then on the other hand, oh, whoa, Jacob Arbenz is going to hurt United Fruit, you're gone. And you need to create that, so it seems to me that there's also the intellectual function that's needed for that, and that's, Kissinger, obviously. I mean, that's theories, balances of power, all of these nations and people and principles are totally subservient to an abstracted chessboard that he saw the world through, and people in that lineage, if that makes sense.
No, that makes absolute sense. I'll take the last part first and then go back to the beginning.
Sorry. In any way, I gave you a lot.
No worries. It's great stuff. And I think you're absolutely right. So it's also at this time, it's important to point out that the idea of national security between the 30s and the 50s becomes an actual thing. And national security, much like the economy and his idea, becomes a thing because it becomes an object of social scientific analysis because it's something that you're able to manage, right? And this is why I see the creation of these sorts of institutions that many on the left today critique. It actually emerges from the early progressive project, capital P progressive, in the 19th and 20th centuries, which was to use experts to manage both political economy in the United States and eventually world affairs in the 1920s and beyond as the United States becomes more involved. So you have the creation of this object of analysis that intellectuals like Speier, intellectuals like Kissinger are able to analyze. So what's interesting here is that you can see how these progressive projects, which is to manage things for the public good, become instantiated in anti-democratic ways due to the peculiar experiences of the first half of the 20th century. So Speier wasn't an idiot. He understood that it wasn't democratic to, for example, overthrow Mossadegh in Iran in 53 or overthrow Arbenz in 54. But he argued that in this moment of crisis, remember, the Cold War is imagined as a permanent crisis, that actions that were previously considered extraordinary were able to be undertaken. So intellectuals like Speier, through arguments like that, are able to provide intellectual succor to what I term in the book an ideology of intervention, and the idea that the United States is able to intervene abroad when, where, and how it sees fit, because it had demonstrated in World War II that it was the only hope for democracy to survive going forward. So what you have here is this total imbrication of progressive politics in what we would consider an anti-democratic or conservative foreign policy, which is a peculiar thing that happens in the middle of the 20th century. And with regards to the first question about the military-industrial complex and everything else, what people forget about Eisenhower's farewell address, in which he talked about the military-industrial complex, that was only the first warning. The second warning was what Eisenhower termed, he was worried about what he termed the scientific technological elite. So at the very beginning, Eisenhower links the military-industrial complex to the scientific technological elite, of which Speier is a part, because they reinforce each other. So the weapons that are being built by the military-industrial complex are justified by the intellectuals like Speier, who argue that the United States needs to have all the power possible in order to defeat the Soviet Union, which they perceive as an existential threat to democracy. And it's important to emphasize here that it's really the trauma of the 1920s and the 1930s that leads people to embrace this perspective. It's hard for us to consider today how traumatic Nazism was to a generation of intellectuals, especially a generation of Jewish intellectuals, because, of course, it's only in the late 40s that Jews are really able to enter the previously WASP foreign policy establishment. And so for these people, the World War II and the Holocaust are really influential. It's not surprising that so many foreign policy intellectuals, all the greatest ones, Albert Wohlstetter, Kissinger, Walt Rostow, Schlesinger, Bernard Brody, all of these guys are Jewish, because it was in the 20s and the 30s when they were coming of intellectual age and they saw their people almost exterminated by the Nazis, a Nazi threat that the United States might not have confronted, that they become really worried about not only democracy's survival, but the survival of their people. So there's a reason. These guys weren't just evil, I want to stress, which is what a lot of the literature had treated them as, but they had this really important trauma, which helps lead them, which helps lead them to this particular political position. And just to get to your final point about sort of the privatization of all these things, The way I would see it is that they're singing the same song, the same anti-democratic song, but they're singing a different tune. So you have in the 50s and the 60s, during this sort of New Deal stage of the American state, the outsourcing of a lot of governmental functions to pseudo-state institutions like RAND, where they're they're nominally private, but they work solely on government contracts, and they're subject to some sort of governmental responsibility. But over time, as neoliberalism becomes much more of the ideology from the 1970s forward, you have the anti-democratic ethos transferred from pseudo-state institutions like RAND to totally private corporations like Blackwater and things along those lines. So again, this is outside the public's and Congress's purview. So the anti-democratic song is the same, even though the tune of pseudo-state versus totally private institutions is slightly different. So you could see, as I see it, and I think a lot of people are showing from 1945 onward, is that there's been a general anti-democratic trend in a lot of areas in American life. So people have focused on very much with mass incarceration or the denial of voting rights, the recent gutting of the Voting Rights Act. And what I show is that this was also true in the foreign policy making process, in which the public currently has almost no say. I mean, you could see after all the protests for the Iraq War, where nothing happened and no one listened to it, it's just the public is not considered to be a crucial stakeholder, ironically, because they're the ones who are fighting and paying for the wars in American foreign policies. So what I think is a lot of scholars are showing that since 45, America has become progressively less democratic in certain significant ways. Of course, this doesn't always hold true. For example, the civil rights movement was critical to getting procedural rights, the right to vote to previously oppressed populations who are, of course, still oppressed. But in a lot of areas, what it means to be a Democrat in America changes from a substantive ideology where people have social, economic, cultural equality to a procedural equality, that once people have the right to vote, their democratic responsibility is done, and now you let the experts rule.
Right, absolutely. So then that sort of leads, as we sort of, move towards sort of summing this conversation up, but then, and I think that I like it because this is another area where there's just so many parallels to draw across so many areas. And of course, I've revealed, the political biases that I have are, zero surprise to anybody watching this show. But I think that, right, so that Trump, his election, that experience was this major shock wave against a certain type of technocratic expertise and a certain type of expectation about how the world works that elite people on both sides of, that sort of brand signifier have. And not to say, of course, people know I certainly thought it was Hillary Clinton was the right and necessary vote in that scenario, but broader and structurally.
Same here.
Yeah, right. So we can, hold all of these thoughts at once. But that being said, and then there's this backlash that we talked about in the beginning. And it's funny because, to me, the appropriate backlash is everything from, the just sort of rank immorality of the whole enterprise to the incorrectness of the policies pursued by Republicans and the baselines are really a fundamental disagreement about how the world should work. It isn't, it's not a math problem. I think everybody should have health care, and I think the United States should not be, killing civilians in Afghanistan or Somalia. And that isn't a procedural argument. That's a baseline argument. And
it's a question of values.
It's a question of values, and that is the fundamental anchoring. And so much of the response, and I think we also got conditioned, particularly if we're in our, if we came of age during the Bush era, and that was the game, was, Bush lies or some Republican says something dumb, then Jon Stewart throws to the objective source that debunks the stupid lie, and then you make a face, and then everybody laughs. But that's over. It's both over and it doesn't get the job done. So, but at the same time, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's like, well, no, I want Daniel Bessner, I would prefer you as a foreign policy advisor to Sebastian Gorka, first and foremost because of our values, but also because I do think that sort of knowing what you're talking about is relevant, and being able. So, I guess what I'm saying is, how do we capture that balance between basically the crude populist backlash, which is, I agree, it's not actually embodied by Trump, but it's tapped into by Trump and Alex Jones and all the other hucksters of our age and salespeople and so on. But then at the same time, not fall back into this other lineage, which might have started with some very understandable, horrific trauma and noble motives. I have to give one dispute on that list. I'm going to maintain I think Kissinger is evil, but maybe that's a conversation for another time. But certainly not these other guys, right?
Yeah.
And there's
Kissinger was also younger.
Yeah, Kissinger was I think there's a real depreciating return on the specific. It's like when you talk about Israel, like.
Right.
Okay, what you did in the 40s is, I'm going to look at a very different lens than 2018. But all of that being said, how do we strike that balance between honoring the role of social science and expertise, but also renewing democracy and making the critique really be one of values and not procedure?
I think that's a great question. And just briefly on Kissinger, he's kind of an outlier here. He was a bit younger and all of these different things, so he's not quite included in the Speier group.
Yes.
Just to make that very clear. But I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think it leads to the general, takeaway of the book, which is that when Speier and all these other intellectuals were uniting with the military and government to create these institutions in the middle of the 20th century, they never once considered the notion of expert accountability. They either assumed that the experts would police themselves, or that the government would naturally police experts if they gave bad advice. But the problem is that this didn't turn out to actually be the case. So you have experts, they're terrible in Vietnam. They lead to this disastrous war, which leads to the death and destructions of millions of Vietnamese and their lives. And of course, hundreds of thousands of Americans are negatively affected by the war, and it doesn't really do anything. But even though there's this very brief backlash to Vietnam, by the mid-1970s, the experts are back in power. They're still guiding Reagan's foreign policy and Carter's foreign policy and Clinton's foreign policy. And they're the ones, people like Wolfowitz, again, helped lead to the Iraq war. So I think the first thing to do is to establish a system, or at the very least a culture of accountability, so that when someone like Wolfowitz, when they contribute to the Iraq war, they're not just able to leave the government to become president of the World Bank. And then when they resign from the World Bank, they're not just under disgrace. I believe he slept with his secretary or something along those lines. So when they resign from the World Bank, they then just can't go to a sinecure at the AEI. And when Jeb Bush runs for president, Wolfowitz can't go to his foreign policy team. There needs to be some sort of accountability in this culture when experts contribute to absolutely horrible policy decisions. And if you don't have that accountability, then people, of course, are going to distrust the experts, because they should distrust the experts, because they gave us Iraq and Afghanistan. And then the other experts on the Democratic side gave us Libya.
Yep.
So and a number of other ones that I can mention. So I think you need some sort of expert accountability. I mean, you see it today when Reince Priebus was just given a visiting assistant professorship at Harvard. Right. At least when Walt Rostow, who was the national security advisor under LBJ and had some very horrible decisions in the Vietnam War, at least when he left government service, he couldn't get a job at MIT or Harvard. He had to go to the University of Texas at Austin, which is a great institution, but it's not where Rostow necessarily wanted to be. So I think you need to have these people not being rewarded for contributing to horrible decisions. And the elite itself has to take that responsibility unto itself to ensure some accountability, because without accountability, expertise becomes degraded. People don't trust it because they are right not to trust it. And then you can't bring knowledge to bear on foreign policy. And I do believe that thinking long and hard about something it should be valuable, right? Now, with something like foreign policy, it's not a science. There's a lot of art, but still, I guess I reveal my cards here. I do think it's worthwhile to have people who have thought long and hard about the subject in positions of power that are able to hopefully provide some good advice. And if they don't provide good advice, then they shouldn't be allowed to provide advice in the future. And I think that is what is completely lacking in our political culture right now. In essence, we need to be more democratic, not less democratic. People like Speier, wanted to answer the gamble of democracy by essentially removing that gamble, by saying that the public shouldn't have much influence. I think what we need to do is contribute. If we on the left agree with this, I think think experts should be a thing. I think we need to contribute to a political education, this very broad idea of helping people understand the world in which we live from the perspective that we see it, and which will also in the end give some more faith to experts who are actually responding to the public's idea and public opinion.
So maybe also just a little bit of Japanese values as well. No, I'm just kidding. Where is the shame?
Total obeisance.
Where is the shame?
Daniel
Bessner. The book is Democracy in Exile, Hans Speier, and the Rise of the Defense Intellectual. It's a fascinating book, and I really appreciate your time. I look forward to more conversations.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
All right, everybody. We are going to head to the fun half, 646-257-3920. JustCoffee.coop. What is it? I don't have it in front of me. It's some massive amount off of, it's an incredible deal. 30% off all Just Coffee products. Become a member of the Majority Report today, majority.fm/become a member. Patreon.com/TMBS or Michael Brooks Show on iTunes or Michael Brooks Show on this website on our YouTube channel. Check out Jamie Peck Patreon. Check out Antifada. It's on iTunes now as well. We'll see you all in the fun half. Oops, 1 second here. Oops. Welcome to Fun Half. We hope you've enjoyed the Majority Report presented by Smart News. Say goodbye to fake news, nasty trolls, and the filter bubble of your social networks. Get your news in 1 minute from 300 trusted sources with Smart News. Available for free in the Apple App Store or Google Play Store. What's that, guys?
We lost the corner of the Majority Report decal behind you, so gonna do a bit of
sad.
Bit of crew maintenance.
People keep track of that sort of thing. Let's see. Let's go to the phones. Well, yeah, let's take one call and then we'll do Jones. You're calling from a 405 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Gregory from Oklahoma.
Hello, Gregory. How are you, man?
All right. How are you?
Doing pretty good.
Looks good. I wanted to call and talk about this is the anniversary of the 23rd anniversary of the bombing in Oklahoma City in the Memorial Building.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gosh. Yeah. Well, what did you have in mind?
I wasn't even alive at the time, so I don't really have a whole lot of info. I think 160 something people died that day.
I don't know the number.
It's pretty sad about it.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's a horrible attack. Yeah.
It was. Someone was trying to say that some white person was trying to say that it wasn't an act of terrorism because obviously it was done by a white person, therefore it can't be terrorism. But it's still an act of terrorism.
Literally textbook definition terrorism. And I'm a guy who does not like to use that word in a very broad sense that even includes horrible atrocities. It's a pretty specific thing, and that absolutely fits the definition of terrorism. Anybody telling you otherwise is insane.
The Oklahoma City
anyway, that's
PBS
all I wanted to
doc.
call about.
Thanks, Gregory. Appreciate it. What was that?
The Oklahoma City PBS doc is really good. It's done by the guy.
Was it Frontline?
Yeah, I think it was an American Experience, which is like longer.
Okay.
But the guy who did the big OJ ESPN doc did it. And
OJ
you find
ESPN doc
that
is amazing.
Yeah, it's really well done. And the guy Timothy McVeigh got his start in Texas at Waco, where he met Alex Jones.
Really?
Yeah. That little segue right there. Sorry.
Well, there you go. That's beautiful. Well, speaking of which, Alex Jones is feeling the heat. The parents of some of the victims of the Sandy Hook atrocities, killings, are suing him because of, a bunch of things he said about that being a false flag or whatever. We have a montage. But first, this is this the montage first? This is him talking about what he's up against.
We are back live.
I want that music.
Coming up at the end of the hour in the next segment, I'm going to go over the AP actually being somewhat honest about what I've really said about Sandy Hook versus the rest of the media. And it's not that I'm running away from saying I think it was a hoax if it was a hoax. For 4 years, I've said I think people really died there. And they know that. The suit by the media, by the Democrats, using the poor parents, is meant to just demonize yours truly, building up to something big. They physically, I can guarantee you, want to assassinate my character ahead of shutting me up, putting me in prison, or having me killed. If you don't think the globalists don't kill people all day, they've hijacked America. They killed President Kennedy. They're trying to kill President Trump. They're trying to stop this country being restored. And they're using a lot of people to demonize their opposition in the wake of it. And so a lot of people are asking me how I'm doing. I am doing great, thanks to you. We have record all-time highest traffic to Infowars.com and Newswars.com right now. And yes, it takes a lot to fight these lawsuits, but I'm not selling a wide-body $50 million jet like Glenn Beck is. I fly a lot of the time in coach.
Oh, man, he is such a petty, messy bitch. Oh, I love that.
Look, it can get really bad around here, folks, but it's never going to be as bad as Glenn Beck. Just to be clear.
Can we do Infowars JFK? Like, yeah, they killed me.
What do we like? First of all, I never said that nobody was killed, so that's a lie. But all globalists do is lie every day, and the Democrats and the globalists, we already know. But I'll tell you this, I'll never be in as pathetic a shape as that goddamn son of a bitch Glenn Beck who stole all of my material. He's crying in front of a gold toilet that he's trying to hawk on eBay right now. Meanwhile, traffic and analytics are higher than ever. This is Alex Jones. This is just a montage, I believe, of all of the things that he did say.
It's 7 minutes. We'll skip around.
We're going to skip around. But the basic point, as you could see, and this is where we still are in the August. I mean, I had that criticism earlier, but of course, Daily Show, Jon Stewart, important signpost, and we're still in that model. So we're doing a little bit of that. We're doing a little bit I didn't say anything. What? It's the Democrats. Well, now let's run the tape.
Sandy Hook, it's got inside job written all over it. Sandy Hook is a synthetic, completely fake, with actors, in my view, manufactured. I couldn't believe it at first. People just instinctively know that there's a lot of fraud going on. But it took me about a year with Sandy Hook to come to grips with the fact that the whole thing was fake. I mean, even I couldn't believe it. I knew they jumped on it, used the crisis, hyped it up, but then I did deep research, and my God, it just pretty much didn't happen.
Wait a second.
I interviewed the cops.
Pause it. I have a question from the deep research that we're doing right now. Now, he's not directly contradicting himself, but I think when you say the whole thing, wouldn't that sort of imply that maybe it all wasn't real, including like people dying? So like I get how the first parts fit with people have died because it's an inside job. That works.
Right.
But that's an implication. He didn't say it directly, but that sounds to me, from my research, like an implication.
How much do you think he had to pay his lawyers to come up with the I'm not saying it was a hoax / I'm saying people died. Like, it could still be an inside job where the feds just killed people.
Right. Right, exactly. That's a really...
Globalists kill people all the time.
Globalists, he literally said it again. Exactly. Globalists kill all the people all the time. All right, let's go.
You don't like us looking at it. You don't like us questioning you. The father needs to clarify, that NBC needs to clarify, because the coroner said none of the parents were allowed to touch the kids or see the kids, and maybe they, meaning at the school, I'm sure later maybe the parents saw their children.
Basically what he said, the statement he made, fact checkers on this have said cannot be accurate.
All right, so look, we got who he is, and that was Owen Schroyer in the last clip, who I believe is also named in this suit. I mean, whatever. I've said a million times, I'm all for, exposing and being clear about who people are and not necessarily, deplatforming them or suing them or whatever. But I mean, Alex Jones, the game he plays is so transparent, and all of that nonsense we play helps create an environment where people who like this, the parents of the victims of Sandy Hook, get death threats. And it's actually really disgusting, and we should register that amidst the comedy. And I'll take an extended shot here, because why not? It's fucked up that Joe Rogan gave him 3 hours or however long. It's messed up. And I get that it's fun, and I get that they get high. I think Jones puffed a little weed, and he's probably more in his, entertainment zone. But, and this is also, and that's connected to a platform that's obviously done a lot to popularize, Peterson and Sam Harris and all these other characters who are, apparently quite concerned about degrading of our intellectual life. So, yeah, it's just a bad look. Maybe Alex Jones was fun back in the day. Maybe it was a joke when he was, trying to...
It was all coded.
I hate, you know what I resent about Alex Jones is that like the version that we have of doing deep research means that like you have to you have to really put a caveat, frame a point. His deep research just leads to like globalists.
His deep research is like, if an article comes out about somebody in like the Pentagon, he'll do a Wikipedia search,
right,
and like try to find something fishy about their background, which, fair enough.
Yeah, fair enough. That's actually probably the best part of what he does. Public Enemy, Michael, I'm an MR member and a TMBS patron. Well, thank you. And a generally progressive guy, but I'm also a fucking idiot. I shouldn't be trusted to run anything. I'm not sure what the left's quote-unquote distrust of the public just applies to conservatives. Anyway, great conversation today. Also, could you do a Cardi verse as Bernie? Yes.
Funny
I think that's
you should
coming
say
down
that.
the road. We've been working on that. Yes. We were doing Mios as Bernie, right? Mio. Whip it like
Versace.
a
Versace.
Whip it like a stir fry. Whip it. And a mean old onion booty make the world cry. What, Jane? Huh? Shut up. What? Molly Percocet. I want Future to get it.
Raindrop. Drop top.
Raindrop. Drop top. What else? These are actually all good. What else we got?
Cooking the dope on a hotspot.
Trap Queen.
Naming, just quoting the 5 most popular rap songs of the past 2 years.
All trap records of the last 10 years will be referenced.
God's plan.
I've been working on my triplet flow.
I'll just be steady transporting. I think that I still think Bill Clinton is total Dipset. Like, I love Dipset, and every time I listen to Dipset, I always just start thinking of Bill Clinton being like, Dipset, Dipset, Dipset. Like, it's just just works.
Killer.
Killer. I got this. I'm in. Joe. Let's start with, okay, this is just kind of funny. Lauren Ingram is back on air after being taken to the woodshed by David Hogg. She is a standout even in the world of worst people in the world. And it was nice to see her.
She's in the stable of Fox News white nationalists.
She is in the stable of Fox News white, a early adapter to Fox News white nationalists. And I actually don't see this one on the sheet, guys.
It's the second page.
It says image.
Sorry.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay, so this is actually really funny. This is her. She's having this guy.
Enrique Morones.
Yeah, this isn't on the list either. Oh, I see. I'm sorry, guys. It's okay. Enrique Morones, who is a Border Angels, which is a group that actually fights to protect and not abuse people on the border or people who are attempting to enter the United States. The type of people that Laura Ingraham demonizes and dehumanizes on a daily basis. And he had this to say to her.
This is the appropriate amount of respect to give to Laura Ingraham.
Exactly.
I guess they're not going to build a wall. Well, we know that. But they're not going to enforce immigration laws. And now this whole thing has reached a fever pitch. Don't you think the fact that all these counties are worried about the sanctuary laws affecting their safety, isn't that a bad harbinger for where this is going?
Not at all. I'm glad David Hogg let you back on the air, by the way. But I'm with the majority of Californians. We don't want to have a wall. We support the sanctuary state situation. The fact that Republican small groups within California are opposed to the sanctuary law, that's not a surprise. But the majority of Californians support the sanctuary state situation. We realize that these undocumented people that are not criminals should not be turned over to ICE, because they're people that have come in the only way they can, risking their lives. We don't encourage that. And we know there's been a 50%, almost a 50% drop in undocumented people coming into the country in the last 5 years.
You might not be aware of this concept. It's called facts. Let me introduce you to a fact.
Fox News. Come on, you're the last.
Let me introduce you to a fact, Enrique. Take a breath.
I'm all about facts, but you're not about facts.
Take a breath. Then you shouldn't come on the show. If it's not about facts, then why are you wasting our time? That's
because you're the ones that insisted.
Come
on. You're the ones that called me 6 times to come on.
Are you in prison? Are you not a man with free will? I'm confused. Border Angels has no free will. I
said I couldn't come on. I was very busy today. Enrique, come on.
If you want to get personal, Enrique, you can get personal. But you just made a statement about how the majority of Californians are not for sanctuary cities.
Right.
59% of Californians say it's important to increase deportations of undocumented immigrants.
Pause it.
That's the use.
That's the same. I mean, I don't know what he's going to go on to say, but there's no doubt that that's a pure, and this is why polls are very problematic. The way you pose that question is going to give you whatever answer you want. And I have no doubt that the same poll, if you said, do you want to decrease, undocumented immigrants, and certainly if you added a word like criminal around it, it would have a high yes rate. If you ask the same question, is that people who've been living here in a city who are law-abiding, should they be able to call the police on a domestic dispute without threat of being deported? I bet that would poll pretty well too.
Yeah, this question doesn't reference sanctuary state laws at all.
Yeah, it doesn't. That's also that. I mean, that's actually that's also a very clear point too. They're not. She's misaligning the polling, but that question doesn't speak to sanctuary cities specifically, and definitely does not offer any type of broader context for how these questions are posed. Go ahead.
Undocumented criminals.
Berkeley,
undocumented
that's
criminals.
the UC Berkeley study, John Cox.
Yeah, but you're wrong with the facts.
Yeah,
they were talking about
John
undocumented
Cox
criminals.
will be
How
able
can
to
he
speak
say-
now. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to just skip ahead a little bit here. This is really good. I mean, he's treating her with utter contempt of disrespect, which is how she should always be treated. But he's calm, he's collected, and you could learn a lot from this guy the next time. If you want to go embarrass some idiot speaker that some right-wing, drones bring to your campus, learn from this guy.
Got to end, and I think the people are rising up, Laura. I think there really is a revolution brewing, just like I think there's a revolution brewing in the governor's race here, and I'm going to be the next governor of this state.
I don't even know who this guy is.
That's very ambitious for.
Who is this Cox guy? I never even heard of him.
Okay, Enrique, you have been Enrique. I just want to tell you, God bless you. I mean, I wish the best for you, but you've been so incredibly rude and nasty since almost the first second of this appearance, and so to say who is he, I'm sure he doesn't know who you are, so who cares? It's a conversation, which is why we actually invited you on the show, to have a conversation about a topic that's actually really important.
Sponsors? David Hogg got rid of half of them.
It's actually really important, and poor Enrique is trying to make waves, and this is how the sad thing is. This is how the left operates. I'm
not on the left.
Yeah, Enrique, thank you for that insightful contribution to the show.
You're welcome.
That was beautiful. And and this is how the right operates. Every time they've been cornered or embarrassed at their own game of ridicule, they always turn into sanctimonious, whiny babies and go, "You have to left operate."
It's funny how, we always talk about how
and poor Enrique did make some waves. Thanks, Enrique.
Yeah, good job, Enrique.
Good jobs.
We talk about how you can't kick people out of the left, but the right often puts people into the left. Like, this is what the left does. Look at this leftist.
Right.
A lot of these people never consider themselves leftists at all.
Yeah. Look at the left defending a teenage activist that I've tried to mock on Twitter and then who totally owned me for weeks. That's what the left does. What idiots. Now, I'd like to have a polite conversation about xenophobia, fear, and racism. Thank you. I'm just trying to dehumanize your people. Why can't we discuss that politely? Man, fuck Laura Ingraham.
Nobody understands me besides my old college editor and friend, Dinesh D'Souza.
Oh, God. All right. You're calling from a 510 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Yeah, hey, Michael. This is Ibrahim from Oakland.
Hey, Ibrahim, what's going on?
I called a few days ago because Dave Rubin was coming again to UC Berkeley. I just wanted to let you know how that went. So he was hosting the event. This time it was that guy, Charlie Kirk, and this other person, Candace Owens.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Fucking
and
logic,
so,
dude.
Yeah. Lots. Oh, my God.
Lots of logic.
So it was actually good that I came on after you just played this clip about immigration, because the main thing that they talked about was immigration and building a wall. And the amount of lies that they said, both of them, was so absurd that, I mean, I could barely sit through all of it. but I was actually able to confront Dave Rubin again about what happened the last time I spoke with him.
Mm-hmm.
And so what he said was that the Q&A was going to be on his Patreon page or something, which was also not true. So he lied again. So so I'll just put it out there flat. They edited the Q&A where I called him out, and there is nowhere on the internet that you can find my question to him.
Well,
It's
it
been
doesn't
completely
surprise
removed.
me. That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Is this also the place? Is
Yeah.
this where Dave had his backpack stolen? Is that the same place?
So
Because I heard that the backpack was stolen. So two things happened, just to tell people. He, on the same day that he was whining about his taxes with like 1980s talking points about like, punishing people for success. I mean, I'm like tax the hell out of. I mean, in fact, Dave Rubin probably doesn't, even with all of his totally massively unwarranted earnings, probably is not in the bracket of people that I would like seriously tax the hell out of. But I would do like a 99 rate, just sort of like on merit taxation of him, because he does not deserve any money he has. But what was funny was that he was whining about his taxes, and then he tweeted at the police department that his backpack was stolen, and it was just kind of like, oh, okay, right. And then the other thing was that apparently the backpack also had his joke notebook in it, which is one of the funniest things I've ever heard in my life. That is the funniest joke.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think he basically parked his car in the Tenderloin, and he was complaining that his car got broken into. And then he was making it political.
Right.
It's like, dude, I mean, I don't know if you've been to San Francisco in a long time, but that's been a problem for years.
Well,
It has nothing to do with you.
Dave's a really stupid guy. But
Can we put out a call, though? I want to say, if anybody has Dave Rubin's joke notebook, we could probably raise some money for it.
Yes. Actually, we're going to need to start. There's a clip of Dave Rubin doing stand-up on YouTube, which we're going to need to find. And it's just, it's pure identity politics. It's pure identity politics. It just keeps asking who else is gay in there. It was pretty disgusting. It was not liberal. Why should your identity matter when you're telling jokes, Dave? God. Yeah.
Yeah, so I uploaded a video of my question. So I actually asked them about, so basically Charlie Kirk just flat out lied about, he said that illegal immigrants have really high rates of crime. And the source that he mentioned was the Arizona, blah, 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 blah. It was obviously cherry picked.
Right.
And I called him out on that. He didn't say anything because it was obviously a lie. And then, I called him out on some other things too. So if you look up My Question for Dave Rubin on YouTube, you can find the video if you got
My Question for Dave
Rubin. Take a look
Rubin.
at the video I did.
Great.
Yeah, My Question for Dave Rubin.
Well, we'll find it.
back
You
and
know what
forth.
we'll do is we'll find it and we'll play it.
Cool. Yeah. So thanks a lot. And,
Thanks, dude.
Again, Dave lying some more, unsurprising.
Sorry, Dave.
Perfect fusion of cynicism and stupidity, Dave Rubin. Thanks for the call, man.
I really want that joke book.
Yeah, I really
I mean, it's going to be empty entirely, but
what would it be? It would sort of be like what would it be, like alt-right Seinfeld? Would that be like? It would be
I can't even imagine it really.
Because it would have to be like the most boring pedestrian wannabe dated 90s
persecution complex.
Yeah, it would have to, but it would be like some type of grid of it used to be, at least you used to be able to get raisins on airplanes. Now it's those chips. What are they? What's the deal with that? And then it would be like black chicks on campuses talking. I mean, come on. I can't get no respect. I actually think my random signifiers of Rodney Dangerfield reference, Jerry Seinfeld reference with racism, I guarantee you is funnier than anything that's in Dave Rubin's notebook. By definition, the parody of Dave Rubin's comedy is going to be funnier than Dave Rubin's comedy.
Yeah, I mean, Dave Rubin's comedy just doesn't seem... I know that's how he apparently started, but it doesn't seem like a phrase that actually means anything.
I mean, yeah, I want to find that out. Yeah, let's find the stand-up now. Can we find the stand-up? We'll do the question tomorrow. Dave Rubin is interesting because, I mean, he's, a menace, and there's the Koch brother thing, anytime you want to despair of the world and think that we're all going to die, look at his Patreon numbers. But on the other hand, I think that he's very like, you know, I think everybody pretty much gets that he's a total goofball and, you know, jackass and airhead. Wait. This is from, now granted, maybe Dave had very different politics back then, but I feel like this is something he should really take accountability for. This is hot gay comic a showcase here. And I think that this is the most, why should your identity matter if you're telling jokes? Jokes should stand on their own. Let's check out Dave Rubin doing, actually, this is going to probably end up being incredibly funny for...
Whoa.
Holy Jesus, people showed up. I'll be damned. How you doing? Yes, how are you? We were a little nervous because this is above ground and a lot of times gay people only do things in groups below ground. But I'm glad you're all here. This is very exciting. Hot Gay Comics live for television. By a show of hands, how many of you have televisions? You have a pretty good. Okay, and how many of you have the Here Network? Okay, we've got some work to do, but we're
pause it.
Very good. So do we have
solid minute of crowd work?
Solid minute of crowd work. All right. So right now we have a solid minute of the crowd work, product placement, and identity politics, and no laughs. 1 minute into Dave Rubin. All right, let's keep going.
We're about third in, folks.
Yeah, third in. Go ahead.
Gay. You're gay.
Oh, rewind it. This is where the identity politics is coming in a way that's just really obscene.
Okay, we've got some work to do, but we're very good. So do we have all gay people? Is everyone here gay?
Just imagine.
You're gay.
Why would you say that?
Very good, very good. Do we have a lot of discussion? Like, did some of you just come out right then? I should tell you I'm gay. We're at a gay show. I thought this would be a good way of doing it. Do we have some lesbians? I sense lesbians in the crowd tonight.
I just have to say, to be fair, there is a through line because Dave actually still does this where he's just sort of like, hey, you have new research that says that Chicanos have a slower cranium and therefore they can't do liberal democracy. Explain that to me. And I'm gay. So that has lasted. All right, keep going.
I should tell you I'm gay. We're at a gay show. I thought this would be a good way of doing it. Do we have some lesbians? I sense lesbians in the crowd tonight. Okay, we're
crowd
a little
work
lesbian
with
heavy
Dave
on
Rubin.
this side. We may have to move some of you. And it's straight people. I should ask about the...
Wait, did he forget? Was his joke book stolen
really?
30 years ago?
Disproportionately powerful.
Oh my God, this is all identity politics.
Really? That many straight here? You, sir, obviously straight with your 4 chicks. And, a lot of straight people. Really? I was going to have security remove like 3 or 4 of you, but I guess we can't do that. Do we have any gays in relationships, or as I like to call them, gays from the future? You two, look at the way you're sitting. You guys are mounting each other in love. Look, how long you been doing it? 7 years. Which in gay years, 30? What are we talking? What is that? 7 years. What's the trick? 7 years. No tricks. Oh.
Okay, the audience member's funnier than him, and we're still in crowd work identity politics.
Okay.
Yep, funny crowd.
So a lot of straight people and a funny crowd. This could be tough. This could be tough for a comedian, for a gay comedian just trying to make his way in the world. This could be tough. But I feel good. Can any gays beat 7 years? Can anyone beat 7 years? Anyone?
Oh my God.
One guy.
Do you
There's no
joke. Do you remember how Richard Pryor or George Carlin would get up on stage and just ask people about their dating status for 5 fucking minutes?
He's like a demographer.
Yeah. Any black people here? Hispanics. Are you from Africa or are you from the States?
I thought this was a stand-up or am I doing the census?
Just
Census comedy with Dave Rubin.
Yeah, the only distinction is every census person that I've ever ran into has been more charismatic.
Better crowd work, though, too.
Much better crowd work. It's like, all right, I'm here for the census. And you're like, oh, okay, you Good crowd work, buddy. Let me just say an addendum here. I don't want to keep going back and forth on this population thing, and I was annoyed yesterday, and I stand by my comment, but I think I was a little too rude to .IAMer, so I want to offer a reaffirmation of what I said and an apology for being a little too quick on the draw there. Sometimes you have to be, so it becomes too much of it's like muscle memory, even when it shouldn't be applied.
Yeah, but it does. I mean, I also sometimes get a bit curt with callers and things like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's
not good.
I'm not promising that I'm not going to stop doing that by any stretch of the imagination. I just wanted to take that moment to be like, all right, I could have been a little. I didn't need to put that much heat on it. I just flick it like a stir fry.
You never know what people are going through.
You never know what people are going through. But at the same time, get the fuck off of the IMs with the same goddamn point. All right, you're calling from a 732 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Nice. Hey, this is Megan from Jersey.
Hey, Megan, what's up?
I was calling. Hey, what's up? I'm glad I was able to get in while you were hosting because I was wondering if you got a chance to see on Monday, Jeremy Corbyn addressed the UK Parliament over the Syrian bombings.
Yeah.
And did you catch it?
Yeah, I mean, he basically just said, that he wants it to be authorized by international institutions, which is a completely legitimate point. And he also said that we should have a full airing of the intelligence, which is also a legitimate point. So, yeah, I mean, in fact, Jeremy Corbyn said nothing that was remotely radical and shouldn't be controversial in any conversation, as far as I'm concerned.
I'm not sure if you caught this part because I haven't actually queued up by chance it, DVR'd it. But so anyway, so he addressed the fact of how he appreciated Theresa May calling to let him know in advance of the bombings and how it went against the advisement of the Security Council. But he specifically said that was going against the United Nations Security Council's, regulations and suggestions. Would that coincide in similar actions by other nations in retaliation of Yemen and other nations with the use of the fellow United Nations countries using illegal cluster bombs and white phosphorus? And I get what you're saying. That he's that part.
Yeah, no, I did, and I think that part actually I'll go back to, and we might use it later, either on the show or on TMBS. We will.
Yeah, I thought that you would.
No, I'm into it.
And
thanks a million for the call. We'll get to it.
Problem.
Thank you. Okay. Baked Nebraska. What do you think of the theory that people are exceptionally scared of chemical weapons because Hitler was spooked by them in World War I? And anything could have...
That's not why chemical weapons weren't used in World War II. The reason chemical weapons were used in World War I was because there was trench warfare. You need stationary targets for chemical weapons.
And she's saying that anything that would have spooked him must be extremely scary shit. No, I don't think so.
No,
they are incredibly scary, horrifying weapons.
But the distinction made between them and other weapons of war is, I think, a bit problematic, and I think mainly PR driven by the Second World War. Like those sorts of things, like we're not going to use chemical weapons. Like that was a PR move because they weren't tactically useful anyway. So you say you're not going to use them, and you get an easy PR victory.
Right. I think that's correct. Thames Darwin, Michael, I got to admit that Dave Rubin's stand-up clip was actually worse than I could have imagined. I'm my whole definition of failed. I'm reimagining my whole definition of "quote unquote" failed comedian. Rubin seems to hit the perfect combination of unfunny and terrible politics. Dorr and Seder only have one of the two.
It was edited, so I still want to see an actual Dave Rubin joke, and not just like, "Hey, is there any like closeted gay people here?"
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's like theoretically he went into his routine, which. My anticipation would be was even worse than what we saw. Oh, man. All right, dude, I'll just read this, but then I'm definitely not going to read these anymore, and I won't respond to them if Sam reads them. Angry monetary theory. Michael, you misunderstood me yesterday and the day before again. I meant that both social democracy, people will get richer, and that means increasing the consumption. More environmental destruction related to developing nations, e.g., climate change related problems there. So reduced population, increase to Western population will actually decrease, like Japan, for instance. Am I wrong here? Will that decrease happen automatically? And is overpopulation useless to worry about? Is it too late to save the planet? I think I've already kind of said my piece on that. Senator Pug, I wanted to thank the Majority Report for your shows at the Tort Conference. I don't think I've expressed my thanks for when Sam interviewed the tort lawyer working on the Takata airbag case, but actually hearing that show, I found out my car needed its airbag replaced well before Honda ever sent me a notification. And this year, you all helped me and my family again. My mom takes Prilosec for some version of it, and when I listened to last week's show, I immediately told her about the renal failure aspect of those drugs. Thank you all sincerely for what you do. I listen to the show every day, and it helps my life immeasurably. You guys are the best. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much. All right, let's do these last couple pieces of sound. Let's start with Trump. He's confident that Rand Paul's going to come through on Mike Pompeo, and because he knows who Rand Paul is.
No, I think he's going to come through. I think Mike Pompeo is extraordinary. He was number one at West Point. He was top at Harvard. He's a great gentleman. I think he'll go down as truly a great Secretary of State. I will say this about Rand Paul. He's never let me down. Rand Paul is a very special guy as far as I'm concerned. He's never let me down. And I don't think he'll let us down again. So let's see what happens. If you remember, he voted for health care, and he did us a big favor. It was somebody else that voted against it that hurt us. So I have a lot of confidence in Rand, but I also have a great deal of confidence in Mike Pompeo. I think.
Yeah, that's true. Rand Paul did a whole grandstanding bullshit. Of course, not about the humanitarian toll of the Republican terrorist healthcare stripping bill, which would kill millions of people, but because of his, deficit nonsense, which obviously at the end of the day, he still voted to strip it. I'm sure all these people have great confidence in Mike Pompeo for his extremism, his closeness to the Kochs, his robust connections to bigots like John Bolton, who's obviously the president's national security advisor. I will say it does seem to me that Rand Paul, if push came to shove, he's a hack and he'll back the president, but he's actually taken votes on foreign policy that are contradictory. So hope springs eternal.
It's useful to point out that, what he says about Rand there could be said of any Republican that has tried to show independence from Trump.
Exactly.
He's always been there with me.
Always been there with me. I humiliated him in every way, shape, and form, completely stripped the humanity of him, and then I showed up, and it was really nice.
Like him and Coker talk a lot of shit in cable, but when I need them, they're there.
Yeah, exactly.
Jeff Flake, too. He votes with me 90% of the time.
Yeah.
Good guy.
Good guy. No
one
more
likes to talk,
sanctimonious.
run his mouth like I do.
Yeah,
respect the game.
And now.
No, you can play a second of that. This little TMBS old sketch special.
And now, Rand Paul's first time on a riding lawnmower since his accident.
Since his accident. I like how you say that.
I got back to Washington in order to vote for the big tax cut, but I wish we could have done more to make children hungry. It's in the Constitution. Constitution.
I don't have any Rand Paul drops.
Yeah, it's actually kind of surprising. Contagious Chameleon. Hey, Michael, what do you think about demanding accountability for intellectuals when the media is so quick to rehabilitate any idiot who's never a Trumper or pseudo-woke? Side note, have we heard about Fellow Travelers blog? Are they trying to give a left perspective on foreign policy? Oh, I've heard about that. I got to check it out more. All right, let's do these last two pieces of sound. Nikki Haley is trying to, she is a perfect mouthpiece for neoconservative foreign policy. She has zero experience. She has no sophisticated analytic capacity. She doesn't understand the world, and everything from running interference for every Israeli crime imaginable, to attempting to undermine the Iran deal, to escalating in Syria, where Assad is committing war crimes, but of course totally on board with the Saudi horror show and war crime brutality in Yemen. But she, in this easy age, has built up a brand for herself because she's able to, properly function and speak on television, and she's quite concerned about her own brand and clearly has wider designs here. She said there was going to be consequences for Russia, and then the administration walked that back. And watch this thing. This is a very serious foreign policy issue, and it's a game of everybody protecting their brands.
You will see that Russian sanctions will be coming down. Secretary Mnuchin will be announcing those on Monday, if he hasn't already, and they will go directly to any sort of companies that were dealing with equipment related to Assad and chemical weapons use.
And welcome back to Hardball. That was U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley promising on Sunday that the Trump administration would implement another round of sanctions against Russia for their support of the Assad regime in Syria. But despite her announcement, no new sanctions were rolled out yesterday. Instead, the White House contradicted Haley, suggesting she spoke out of turn and that no decision had been reached. This morning, the newly minted White House economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, told reporters that, quote, she got ahead of the curve. She's done a great job. She's a very effective ambassador. There might have been some momentary confusion. Now, according to a spokesperson, Ambassador Haley responded to that by saying, with all due respect, I don't get confused. And Kudlow has now reportedly apologized tonight, telling the New York Times the policy was changed and she wasn't told about it, so she was in a box.
It's a chick in a box. Haley was in a box. Those were the days when Saturday Night Live was funny. Yeah.
I'm still laughing about how we put Haley in a box.
Hey, Larry, what about she comes back to Washington and we go, here's the new Russia policy documents, and instead it's you in a box, just like that video.
Hey, I got a message for you, Haley. Psych.
Yeah. No, how could you get confused? This is a totally tight, coherent ship. I mean, look, though, that's all the signifier to her prospective right-wing think tankers and arms manufacturer hawks, that she's the one who's really she's attempting to pulling off the balancing act, and it works very well for her that she's in New York, and she even gets sort of set pieces where she's at the United Nations, that she is in but not of the Trump administration. And of course, the bigger point is that, Trump, I heard the phrase recently, I forget where, but it was a great phrase. It's not mine. I just truly cannot remember where I heard it from. It was Trump laundering. And this idea that, whether it's Republicans trying to wash away the fact that they support U.S. imperialism, wars of aggression globally, or, social Darwinism, savagery, racism at home, or neoliberals and Democrats excusing their own advocacy for war, oppression, inequality, and disparities, that, Trump, through his unique grotesqueness and foulness, washes it away, even though the policy framework is in the same universe. And Haley is amazing because she's right at the intermediary grid of literally like, I'm not of this Trump thing, even though I'm literally his ambassador to the world under his administration. And then every time I'm out, supporting Israel and killing, murdering people in Gaza or anywhere else, I'm a perfect mouthpiece for the Republican consensus. So watch her. I'm not happy, obviously, that Barbara Bush died. I'm not going to pretend that I overly care either. I used the opportunity to do a funny routine, but I don't, it's sad on a personal level. I think this was an interesting response that Trump had to
Dignified.
Super dignified. One of those moments where you're just like, well, thank God we finally have some honor and dignity back in the White House.
Melania and I send our prayers to Barbara's husband of 73 years. I'll never beat that record.
What? Shinzo, this was translated for you. What the hell's your problem?
Gosh, it's like Dave Rubin did crowd work here to open up.
God, I'm not Dave Rubin.
I'm the new W.H. Auden. And this is the proper way to memorize this woman. Not going to beat that record. Sorry, Barbara, you got that one on me. I could if I wanted to, but I'm not going to.
I could have.
It's too busy having fun.
Jonathan Armstead, I just wanted to follow up with your point yesterday regarding how the media will react when Kissinger dies. I'd like to echo your point from a few weeks ago on certain alt-right darlings like Milo are often compared to Christopher Hitchens but lack his intelligence. I doubt that when Kissinger dies, anyone will mention a single point that Hitch brings up in this must-read 2001 book, The Trial of Henry Kissinger. That's right. This new crop isn't the intellectually honest. In fact, when we start the revolution, all they probably do is squeal. One love. That's a fucking great I am. I should have ended on that.
I think it's right that it's going to be obscene. I also think that it gets less obscene over time. Like I think like versus Reagan's or versus like just the way media is less concentrated. I think
that's true. There's going to be a lot of us who, when he died, you actually saw that with Thatcher. There was some accounting of her. Cable will be awful. The final I am of the day goes to Carson Freestyle. Candy on beat. Tiffany, so gross. So gross, Donald only got a handy. My piece of ass so sweet they call her Candy. Got so much money, I got $31,000 tables. Bitch, I'm rich, that's no fable. Fat man ain't glad though. Trump so mad ho. I tell him, get back. Stage Miss Teen America, so creepy. They should call you Nambla, I got my hands on your head. I got my hands on your head. What? We out. Carson, peace. One love, F Train, supplements, 7th Day. We taking all these motherfuckers out. HUD scams. John Bolton's about to start World War III. People ain't even noticing where I have my hands. The whole new dining sets. Candy, you can have whatever you want, and that's my word. It's born. We out. Jesus Christ. All right, everybody. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Brendan. We're back live tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie.